Who are some badasses in history that school didn't teach you about? Albert Jacka, some kind of Australian superhuman that slashed his way through Dardanelles and made a throne out of the Ottoman corpses. This fight earned him the Victoria's Cross. In the north of France he got blown up by a grenade, but he got up and began to punch his way out of a trench. Got shoot 7 times with 1 bullet in the head, but got up again, free 20 prisoners and push back the offensive. He then was transferred to a communication and information gathering unit where he kept his usual modus operandi when he met Germans. Punching. After war he became the mayor of his hometown and died of the only thing he couldn't beat to death: pneumonia. Link. Dude looks like the commander of the elf reinforcements in LOTR. King Sejong of ancient Korea was so tired of the Chinese-style writing. So he said, "FK this ST," and devised an entirely new form of writing that led to the modern Korean Hangul. Not the badass you all were probably thinking of. But the man was a genius for this. Gotta love an intellectual badass as well. Not what I was looking for. But still very much welcome. I like bits of history like this. Have you heard about the time where President Andrew Jackson has to be held down because he was beating an assassin? He came from a meeting at the Senate, I think. And while he walked, a man who people think was mentally challenged pulled a gun and shot Andrew Jackson. But the gun misfired and Andrew Jackson got so mad he began punching and beating the living crap out of the man. The man pulled yet another gun which misfired yet again, making Andrew Jackson even more pissed. It ended up with the man being so beat up and Andrew Jackson continuing to beat him with his walking cane that a soldier had to pull the 67-year-old president away. Sorry for any mistakes on mobile, so formatting might not be good. If there's mistakes I'll gladly explain. Just ask. Joan of Arc. Awesome Frenchwoman. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill. Also went by Jack Churchill. Fighting Jack Churchill and Mad Jack. This wondrous British officer carried around a longbow and arrow and a Scottish longsword during WW2. To top that all off, he also had some bagpipes. Edit. Spelling. Last confirmed wartime kill with a longbow in history. I think he was the one who complained that the war ended too early. He is also the same guy who said that if you went into battle without a sword you were not properly dressed. Great man lol. I watched a video about him. Mad lad went to a German trench with only a sword and all 80 men surrendered. Probably thinking he was either a god or they couldn't shoot a guy with those BS of steel. Alan Turing. The man who made way for modern-day technology by creating the first computer that many say changed the outcome of World War II. He was arrested because he was gay. Desmond Doss. A medic in World War II that never carried a weapon into battle. He was given the Medal of Honor for his brave work on the battlefield of Hacksaw Ridge, which is the name of the great movie about him, where he single-handedly saved over 70 lives under enemy fire. He died in the early 2000s. That one pig that crossed a border and the Americans went to war over it lol. Leroy Jenkins. All right. Guns up. Let's do this. Lyudmila Pavlichenko. One of the greatest snipers of all time. Battle for Sevastopol was a fantastic movie about her. Muhammad Ali. He was a great fighter in the ring and had even tougher fights out the ring. The African American women who helped get the U.S. into space. They did the math better than the IBM. But I was never taught anything about it. They were called computers. If I'm not mistaken. Edit. The women. I mean, that Chinese hooker who basically ruled the 7 seas. Yar. Qing Shi. Zheng Shi. Chinese pirate leader who terrorized the China Seas during the Joqing Emperor period of the Qing dynasty in the early 19th century. She commanded over 300 junks manned by 20,000 to 40,000 pirates, men, women, and even children. She entered into conflict with the major nations, such as the British Empire, the Portuguese Empire, and the Qing dynasty. She is widely considered to be the most successful pirate in history, based on the fact that she commanded the largest crew ever assembled, and that she died in her own bed as a free woman. Emphasis mine. I watched some great videos on the historical accuracy of movie events. One of them summed up the portrayal of piracy as something like this: everything you see in pirate movies never happened in the Caribbean and is only half as fantastical as what happened in Asia. Her name starts with a Z or something similar, I think. The Viking of Stamford Bridge. When Harold Hardrada's invading army was surprised by the British in 1066, they were caught off guard and needed time to prepare and put on armor. A huge lone Viking armed with a Dane axe held the bridge against the entire English army, killing 40 men and refusing the Brits entry. It went on for that long. We floated a man underneath the bridge in a barrel who stabbed the behemoth Viking straight in the crown jewels. That man must have had one weighty NK. Simo Heya. I love that story. Even the Winter War itself is a funny story. Russia is held back by a country with a significantly smaller military who are using old guns and other tech from World War I. A lot of things were done wrong by Russian high command in Russia's defense. But that doesn't make it any less ridiculously funny that they lost to a military only a small fraction of Russia's size. Do you know who Amo Koivunen is? The TLDR is there was a combat stimulant, meth. Soldiers used to stay aware and active during the WW2 era. A guy took all the combat stimulants his squad had and went on a 2-week killing spree attacking the invading Russians. Similar to Heya, he also survived the war. Lol. I knew the story but couldn't remember his name. Gives me all the drugs and I will goes kill Russians. Quote. Okays. Sounds good. Have the fun. Quote. That picture. He's still a little methed up. The Winged Hussars. Here's an educational video. Link. Absolute legend. I literally saw this and just thought if that link is the song. God tier. When the Winged Hussars arrived, coming down the mountainside. The battle for Castle Itter. I find it interesting of Germans and Americans fighting side by side. Chhatrapati Shivaji. Rani Lakshmibai, the Queen of Jhansi. William Billy Lee. He was George Washington's attendant slave, and as such, he accompanied Washington just about everywhere. As a result, he not only became an accomplished horseman, due to Washington being a top-level rider himself, but he was also in the midst of the fighting throughout the entire Revolutionary War, likely making him one of the first African Americans to be a part of that cause. In general, non-whites weren't allowed to participate directly until a ways into the war. IIRC. He was also the only slave of Washington's who was freed immediately when Washington died. And he was given the option of living at Mount Vernon for the rest of his life, which he did. Unfortunately, pretty much everything we know about Billy comes from sources written only by other people who knew him, as he doesn't seem to have left behind any autobiographical data. The saddest part is, despite his valiance as well as being an attendant to someone as iconic as George Washington, him having been enslaved for most of his life is cited as having contributed to the somewhat scarce mention of him in primary sources. I never learned about him in school and didn't hear about Billy at all until I was about 29 or 30. In the past year or two. And it's especially disheartening that no writings from his point of view are known to exist. Edit. Changed a phrase to be more fitting following another Redditor's suggestion. Slave joined the cause. I have a feeling he didn't exactly volunteer. Yeah. Maybe acted as part of the cause would have been better. I'll change it. Thanks for pointing that out. Interesting. Cthulhu. John Paul Jones. My friend who was in another school before he came to mine told me about him. FG awesome. Great bassist. Great band. I have not yet begun to fight is the greatest historical one-liner of all time. I haven't seen it yet. Pega Magabo was a Canadian sniper from WW1. He would often go to enemy trenches to steal food and supplies and even cut off pieces of German uniforms and a whole lot of other things. Look him up. Stanislav Petrov prevented WW3. The White Death. Finnish sniper who kicked Russia's ass. Almost Night. A Crimson Horizon. This is just a Sabaton fan hot zone. Two that I haven't seen mentioned here are Larry Thorne or Laurie Torney. A guy who fought in 3 different armies from World War II through to Vietnam. And the soldiers that fought in the Battle of Wisna. One of many battles dubbed Polish Thermopylae. In this instance, because the Polish were outnumbered against the Germans roughly 40-1. Hercules Mulligan. Sons of Liberty spy who made uniforms for British officers during their occupation of New York in the Revolution. The officers openly talked about British plans and strategies, and Mulligan got that info to Washington. Twice. He saved Washington's life. While the American Civil War was going on, China was dealing with its own against Jesus's younger brother Hong Xiuquan. Guy has a crazy story, and the conflict that he was part of was one of the bloodiest in history. He convinced his followers that they would all become invisible when they went to attack. Michael Malloy. He was an Irish alcoholic who frequented a bar. 3 friends including the bar's owner decided to take out 2 life insurance policies on him. First, they let him drink as much alcohol as he wanted, without him having to pay. After that failed, they gave him methanol. That plan also failed. Then they gave him a sardine sandwich, soaked in methanol and filled with nails. If I remember right, Michael asks for another sandwich after eating the first one. Then they decided to dump him in the freezing cold and pour water on top of him. After that plan failed, they just ran him over with their taxi. He came back a few days later, and the men decided to wait until Michael fell unconscious. After that, they took him upstairs, put a gas pipe in his mouth and wrapped a towel around his head. This was the last attempt on his life, and was successful. They were then arrested for attempted fraud and murder. Lapu Lapu. History books often cite Magellan's death with a passing sentence like "died in Southeast Asia while circumnavigating the world," but Filipinos know he was killed in the Philippines by Lapu Lapu in the Battle of Mactan. When Magellan landed in the Philippines, he made a deal with a neighboring king, Humabon, that if Magellan took care of a rival chief on the other side of the island, Humabon would swear fealty to the King of Spain. Magellan had no idea he was being used. Magellan initially offered not to attack Lapu Lapu if he bowed to both Humabon and the King of Spain. Lapu Lapu refused, and Magellan marched over with his heavily armed and armored men and was thoroughly thrashed by hundreds of Filipino warriors with swords. Lapu Lapu is now a national symbol against Western colonization, but I don't think anyone in the US is keen to put him in a textbook. Really. The only mention of the US in the Philippines I got was boiled down to "saved y'all from the Spanish." Conveniently left out Philippine-American War. America allied with the Philippines to drive the Spanish out, and when the Spanish surrendered, the Spanish basically handed then Philippines over to the US as the new colonizers. They then spent 5 more years quashing rebellions of outraged Filipinos. After the war, they introduced the U.S. education system and rewrote the whole history for a new generation. Fun fact: the .45 ACP was invented because Moro tribes in the South kept hacking up American soldiers in the Philippine-American War. They had to invent a whole new bullet with more stopping power because the tribesmen kept charging American soldiers and cutting them down despite being riddled with bullets. LMAO, I love that fun fact. I am American, but I'm from a rugby family and my dad loves Islander people, the Moro tribes, and New Zealand. Awesome stuff. Artemisia Gentileschi. Matilda Gage. She was a hardcore feminist who also fought for Native American rights and was an abolitionist. She fought hard to get rights for everyone and was also really smart in fields like science, and the Matilda effect is named after her, which is the tendency to not give women credit for scientific invention. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos.